Hi everyone, it's Legato. I am back with another State of the Game blog, and we are going to break down today's patch notes. A lot of good changes in these patch notes, and I'm excited to go through them. First up, we have the Hunter synergy reduced from 35 damage to 25 damage. So that is just under a 30% nerf to the total damage that the synergy provides. I think Hunter was the dominant early game opening strategy in most scenarios, and this is going to have a bigger impact um, than it might look like on first glance. One of the reasons that builds like Goblin and Human, which are momentum based and give you books of experience or books of or hearts of mech. One of the reasons that those struggle is because 3 Hunter is so strong early game. So if you make it just a little bit weaker, you might see more chance to open with 3 Goblin and transition into other builds from that path as opposed to Hunter. The the chance to not miss on attacks increasing from 35% to 50% is not very impactful early game. So if we use the example of Ice Plate Mail, which provides 15% evasion, basically with the Hunter synergy before, the unit with Ice Plate Mail would more or less have 9.75% evasion. Instead of 15 because of the 35% chance to miss, and now that unit would go down to 7.5% evasion. So you're really only getting 2% extra chance to hit early game with an item like Ice Plate Mail or Halberd or Shadow Edge, which all provide 15% evasion. So I think it's pretty minor there. It'll be more impactful when you're talking about mid game. And you start to get like a stacked 2-star Warpwood with Feathered Synergy and Ice Plate Mail and potentially even an additional Lucky Coin or a Halberd or a Shadow Edge. The chance to not miss going up to 50% is going to be a lot more impactful then. But if we're specifically talking about the early game rounds where Hunters dominate, this is overall a pretty big nerf to the synergy. One final thing to note on this is basically 30% nerf is the largest numerical nerf that I can think of in a very long time for a build. Right? When we're talking about 9 Warrior, they bumped it down from 20 armor to 18, which was a 10% nerf. We've seen them play with Goblin a couple times where they moved it from 15% down to 12 armor, 15 armor down to 12 armor, which was a 20% nerf, and then they moved it back up to 15. So I can't recall a time where we saw more than a 20% change to a synergy at once, and a 30% change, 30% damage reduction all at once is a pretty big change. So I'm hopeful that this will open up a wider range of early game options and make them more competitive. Next up is Assassin. So a couple changes here. For 3 Assassin, the crit rate for the first attack goes from 40 to 50%. So that's a 25% increase, right? 10 out of 40 is a 25% increase over the prior value. 6 Assassins, which previously struggled quite a bit as a build, had their crit rate increase all the way up to 100%, so you get a guaranteed crit on the first attack with 6 Assassins. I think this is a great change. Before, 3 Assassins was more or less viable as an opener, and maybe you could transition into Insectoids or 9 Assassins from the 3 Assassin opener. And 9 Assassins was a pretty viable build, so I've seen players like Joker on ladder, stay level 7, stay level 8, and roll for 3-star assassins and take first or second place with that build. It's definitely a viable build in the current meta. So 3 assassin was in an okay place, not great, but an okay place. 9 assassin was in a good place. So now we see a little bit of a buff to 3 assassin and definitely a huge buff to 6 assassin. I think you'll see them played more frequently, and it'll act as a check on a lot of other builds, like popular squishy divinity builds that want to get their abilities off multiple times. It's not going to be happening if your squishy units are blown up by assassins. So I think this is a good change. Minor change to Kira. It can only stack up to 7 times, down from 8 times. So I think the value, if I'm not mistaken, was 20%. So if it stacked 8 times, you could get 160% HP and attack, and now it's down to 140%. So every little bit helps. It doesn't look like it's going to completely neuter Kira, but I think it was a little bit overtuned, especially with Insectoid. So nice to see a change there. Okay, next up is items. So I am very, very happy to see that they adjusted Crystal Sword. Previously, Crystal Sword, you took 2 20 flat damage items, combined them, and it stayed at 20. So it didn't give you the 40 combined value that you would expect. And the critical rate used to only be 15% instead of 20% to get that 1.5 times crit. So if I'm not mistaken, the break-even point on the amount of damage you had to do for Crystal Sword to be equally effective combined versus uncombined was 179 damage previously. So if your unit was doing less than 180 damage, it was better off to leave the item completely uncombined. So it was quite weak. Now it's one of the stronger pure physical DPS items that you can put on units. So if we take the example of a unit that has 100 base attack, and then you throw Crystal Sword on it, 80% of the time it'll just be doing that 140 flat damage, and then 20% of the time it'll get the 1.5 crit, boosting it up to 210, so it'd be 154 DPS. So you get, for a unit that had 100 flat attack value previously, that's a 54% increase off a single item. So that's a nice DPS boost. And then if you look at the values, if you look at the same scenario with the old Crystal Sword, where you say, okay, a unit has 100 attack value, and then you combine it, obviously it's much less than the 40 flat damage that you were getting from the Crystal Sword. You'd only be getting 129 damage total. So it's almost double as effective as the prior combined item for a unit with 100 attack value. So 29 versus 54 there. So that is quite nice. I think especially in hunter builds, like if you have a 6 hunter build and an Agursis Ranger 3-starred, Crystal Sword would provide a really nice DPS increase to a unit that's hitting for like 300, 400 flat damage. That 20% crit is going to start becoming relevant, especially for units that blink in, like a Fallen Witcher or a Swordman blinking into your back line. If the Agursis Ranger is focusing it down and gets a crit off early, that unit's going to be shut down before it can DPS your back line. So I like this change quite a bit. Whether or not people still combine Crystal Swords is yet to be seen, because Blink is so impactful, the Teleport Staff is so impactful, and the Black Ice Lance is really important for defensive capabilities and also for builds that blink in with like Fallen Witcher and pushing a Taboo Witcher off, so you can get your ultimate off, you can get your transform off, or for example a Water Spirit in Divinity builds, pushing the Taboo Witcher away with Black Iceland. So I still think in a lot of situations that those two items are going to take precedence for the defensive capabilities that they provide. But if you already have one of those, or you're just going for raw DPS, Crystal Sword's now a viable option, whereas it really wasn't before. Okay, next up, Dragonbone Ballista, a really big change. So this item was more or less viable previously, just because the crit value was so large. It's just that it was very infrequently made because the Crystal Sword was infrequently made. So now that you're going to see Crystal Sword made more frequently, it's likely that you'll see a lot more Dragonbone Ballistas. You would have seen a lot more Dragonbone Ballistas anyway, and now with this substantial buff that the item is getting, I think you're going to see this item quite a bit. 70 raw damage and 20% crit with a 350% chances. That's a big boy item. That's a big boy item on Fallen Witcher. That's a big boy item on, a Gursus Ranger, on Sniper. You're going to see a lot of scenarios where the burst damage is enough to completely kill units before they can get their ultimates off. So I'm excited for that. I think even on assassins, right? They already have the guaranteed first hit crit, and then they have their, if you're thinking about 9 assassin, they have their 30% chance to crit after the first attack. Well, now if you throw a Dragonbone Ballista and you have the additional 20% chance from that, I think it stacks with diminishing returns. So I don't think it's additive 20% and 30%, but you're somewhere probably in the mid 40 range for a crit for a unit that has this. So like an Abyssal Crawler 3, for example, if you think about how quickly he's attacking and you get like mid 40% chance to crit with Dragonbone Ballista, he's going to be crushing units. So I think this item combined with the assassin changes is going to be pretty interesting. Okay, next up. I'm going to talk about all of these items as a group, and then I'll break it down individually a little bit further. So Resistance Cloak got 10 HP regeneration added to it. Anti-Magicka Cloak, which is the double Resistance Cloak item, got 20 HP regeneration added. Jade Pipe, which is the Anti-Magicka Cloak plus the 40% mana gain nether item. I forget its name. That gets 30 HP regeneration a second. They added 10 HP regeneration to Puppet Mask and 10 HP regeneration to Heart of Tarrasque. So basically, because Resistance Cloak is one of the lesser parts for Puppet Mask and Heart, they just added the flat value to the items that it combines into. All right. So the first thing I want to point out about these changes is, although it's pretty niche, Oblivion Staff previously had only 2 scenarios where it was reducing the HP regeneration, on the Goblin buff and on Venomancer. So it did not work on flat healing or spell-based healing or Warlock. It didn't work on any other type of life gain. It only worked on natural HP regeneration per second. So there was only 2 sources of that in the game. Now there are quite a bit more that Oblivion Staff is impacting. With that being said, these flat values are pretty muted. Like 10 HP regeneration a second is not very impactful on Resistance Cloak or Puppet Mask. Not very impactful on Heart of Tarrasque. A little bit more impactful on Anti-Magicka Cloak, but that item is still extremely underwhelming, and a little bit more impactful on Jade Pipe. That item is also very underwhelming. So if you were to ask me the question, do I think this is a good buff or do I think this is a bad buff overall? Overall across this set, I think it is a bad buff and it's very lazy. Why do I think that? So Jade Pipe is a super underwhelming legendary item. It provides, I think, 250 a 250 magical damage shield to units within a 2 radius cluster. So let's compare that directly to something like Ice Armor, which does 350 area of effect damage to all units within a 5 radius cluster. Obviously the 350 damage inflicted by the Ice Armor overwhelms the 250 damage that's absorbed by the Jade Pipe by a full 100. Additionally, Ice Plate Mail gives 10 armor, 15% evasion, slows the enemy units, and the damage that you're dealing to basically their entire team with that AoE magical damage allows you to get your spells off very, very quickly, like a pull staff or a teleport staff. So the main benefit of Jade Pipe is the 250 damage that it prevents damage. It prevents your team from taking. So if you're thinking about magical damage that you're blocking, you're thinking about basically AoE magical damage. So think about Tortola, which a 2-star Tortola does 600 damage without any mage synergy. I think it does 1140 damage or something like that if you have the 6 mage synergy. So you're blocking a very, very, very small amount of the AoE damage. And then it also just gives 20% resistance to the unit it's directly on, and now it gives the 40% mana gain when you're attacked, and now it gives 30 HP regeneration. So the main purpose for Jade Pipe is the magical damage. In order to combat AoE, it forces you to cluster your units into a very small radius to actually get the benefit, which is the opposite of what you want to do for an AoE item. And the numerical value of magic damage that it blocks is relatively low. It's probably the worst legendary item overall, right? If you're talking about magic resistance, you really just want Claw Wand on your carry or your most important unit. And items like Ice Armor, Barbaric Cuirass, Infused Mask, Holy Spirit Lance are way more impactful and provide their benefit way better. So I think slapping on 30 HP regeneration for an item that already struggles to fulfill its role doesn't fix the underlying problem, and it's a really, really lazy buff. So I don't like this. I think Anti-Magicka Cloak is still not a very good item, and slapping on 20 HP regeneration doesn't help that much. Puppet Mask is already an alright item, but 10 HP regeneration is very muted, right? You're not going to make this really rounds 1 through 10. You're going to make it later on when you have a carry like Fallen Witcher or a carry like Venomancer that you don't want to silence them with Mask of Madness. And just slapping on 10 HP regeneration isn't going to provide more of an incentive to make it early. So I think any buff, any small tweak is a step in the right direction for underperforming items. So it's better than nothing. But really, these HP regeneration changes don't address the underlying problem. And specifically in the case of Jade Pipe, where they give it the most HP regeneration compared to any other item, it's still really underwhelming. So I would prefer them to take a look at Jade Pipe, understand what is the purpose of the item, and tweak the actual values that go towards fulfilling its purpose. Maybe you just make the 200 magical damage apply to every unit on the team, not just units in this small radius, so that you can actually spread out and try to avoid some of the magical AoE damage that's coming your way. Maybe you increase it to at least 350 damage absorbed so that it can be on par with the amount of damage that ice armor is outputting. Right? There's a lot of different things to look at, and I still think even if you increase the value to 350, it's going to be the least effective legendary item overall. So I'd like to see them put more thought into that in the future. Okay, game mechanism. The damage to the enemy player dealt by the insectoid summons is half compared to what it used to be. I think when you're talking about insectoids, any nerf is a step in the right direction, but this is a very underwhelming change. So in the past, you would have rounds where you can do like 32 damage to the team, and now that might get bumped down to 24. It doesn't influence any of the underlying factors that make insectoids so strong, right? Even when you're casting multiple plague wards or you have multiple spider summons, they're still doing 1 damage apiece, and with the other items, with the other units that are on the board, that's still going to add up to over 20 damage in a lot of scenarios. So you're still doing an insane amount of damage. Does nothing to address the actual strength of the composition, which most other builds need to high roll both their units and their items to be able to compete against a medium rolled insectoid build. So insectoid beats glacial knights most frequently. It rarely loses to 6 hunter builds that transition and add legendaries like 2-star dark spirit and like a 2-star siren that can get its ability off quickly. Those builds still get shredded by insectoid. Dragon mage is still going to get shredded by insectoid. Divinity mage still going to get shredded by insectoid. So maybe this build, this change can buy a little bit of additional time for builds to get Force Spirits up once Stone Spirit is added to the game. So from that perspective, it's a nice step in the right direction, but I still think the insectoid build de-incentivizes a lot of other builds to be played if you're trying to get top 2 in the lobby. And if you're trying to rank up on ladder, that's really what you have to be targeting, is a build that's going to get you top 2. Okay, it looks like they fixed some visual bug in duo mode. So I've seen this visual bug in both mobile and PC, and it's saying specifically that the fix is for PC. So I don't know. I imagine that there's still going to be quite a few bugs for duo out there that have to be addressed in the future. And then the final change is that a tie will not provide the bonus gold for snapping someone's winning streak any longer. So I think the scenario that this is most likely to play out is a 3-star Warpwood, either in Divinity or 6 Feathered, where mid-game the unit's just basically immortal, and someone with a much stronger build basically stalls out, and 6 of their units are attacking the Warpwood and unable to kill it. So it's nice that it's still going to snap their win streak for the player that was previously win streaking, but it's just not going to provide the bonus gold to the Feathered or Divinity player that basically has one strong unit that's stalling out the other comp. So I like that change. Okay, that is all, and thanks everyone for listening.